I just want to let you know a little about coming attractions. Next month, Ron Phelps is going to tell us about the Ebenezer Allen House down at the end of South Street. It's one of the first houses on the island, built by one of the Green Mountain Boys. And Ron and his family have lived across the street from it forever. So he has seen a lot of changes to it that he will be sharing with us. So that's going to happen. You might be interested to know that the Free Press has asked us to prepare an article for them. You may have seen every Sunday they feature some town, and they have a big spread of pictures and history. And we're going to be featured probably in September. So some of us have met, and we've collected pictures and documents and all that sort of thing, and brainstormed. And Ken Roshlow is going to try to pull it all together for us.
Never write anything, because if you write it once, you write it all the time.
The theme is going to sort of be something about like the isolation of the islands and the effect that it had on us and the various changes that changed the isolation as people could more easily get back and forth. You know, we used to have to go across on the ice, and then we had the sandbar in various stages of construction, and then we had the railroad. And now people are just going back and forth all the time. So, is there any other business? If not, we're ready for tonight's program. We're very happy to have Eloise headboard with us tonight. And also, Ingrid headboard.
I'm just technical stuff.
Thank you. Eloise was a freelance writer for many years.
Yes.
Maybe you still are.
No.
And you have done, I've seen an article that you did on the miniature castles. And we're all so happy to have you tonight.
Well, it's a fun topic.
Yes. Yes, we need to use the mic.
And is it possible to turn off those lights?
Yes.
Yes.
Is it going to be okay, Ken?
Right now I can.
Can you see still? Can you
Okay.
Can you get?
And here you are. I apologize for not using it. Let's switch to here.
Yeah, great. On the
Yes.
side.
Yes. Well, thank you all for coming. Okay, is this better?
You gotta turn it on.
Is that on?
Yeah, that's good.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm so happy to see people here interested in these castles. It's funny, a lot of people don't know much about them.
Louder.
Hold it close to your mouth.
Okay, is that better?
Yes.
Okay. But these are Harry Barber, who you probably recognize the name, castles, that were built between about 1925 or 30 until his death in 1966. And they were not a business. He did it because he loved it. This gives you some idea where the castles are located. In all, I think he built about a dozen castles. At least 7 survive. And only one, to the best of my knowledge, has been moved, but somebody could correct me on that. Okay. Harry was a Swiss immigrant. He was born in 1900, and he arrived here in South Hero in 1921. There are lots of tales as to how that happened, but basically he was born in Neuchâtel, Switzerland. His father was a stonemason, which may explain how he figured out how to do this. And of course, Switzerland is a inspiration if you like castles. In fact, if you've been anywhere in Northern Europe, I think Southern Europe too, there will be, every rise of land, there seems to be a castle or at least some kind of fortification, new, old, or somewhere in between. Anyway, Harry grew up surrounded by these castles. And, you know, he also grew up, he also grew up seeing some of the most inspirational castles. This is Neuschwanstein in Bavaria, which is, well, it was built by Mad King Ludwig in the late 1800s, but it is the one that inspired the Disney World castle. And again, it wasn't ever a real fortification, but it's amazing to see. And it appears that Harry just liked those turrets and all of that. He just thought they were wonderful. So he was born, or at least I understand he was born, and again, anybody knows anything, please correct me, because I reported on these castles about 25 years ago. I never met Harry Barber. I talked briefly to his widow, who did not want to be quoted. She gave me some information, but she didn't want to be quoted, very private person. So what I'm telling you is third, fourth, fifth hand. So if you know anything, please tell me. I'd love to know more about him. Yes?
About 6 months ago, I met his son, who's about my age. I'm 67, and I forgot what his son's name is.
I think he's also Harry, I believe.
Yeah, okay. I was surprised he's not here.
He was invited, I understand, and
Yes.
was busy. In fact, he was invited to give the presentation, which would have been more appropriate.
Yeah.
But, as I said, his family seems very private. I think they always were. But he was born the son of a stonemason, as I said. No, there's one there that I wanted to... Okay, well, maybe we're missing the one I wanted to show. But anyway, this is rolling farmland with water around it. So this may have felt a little bit like home. We're much flatter than they are, but you have the rolling farmland and you have a lot of water. So I think when he arrived here in South Hero, it felt like home to some degree. And maybe the people were very welcoming. He apparently fell in love very shortly after he arrived here, which is why he stayed. And he, to the girl, yes. But the thing that was interesting was that there are now a number of different tales told about how he came to be here. Some people claim that he was injured in a mining accident and got a settlement from the government. Well, there is an asbestos mine in Neuchâtel, so possibly that's true. Others say that he had planned to go to Chile and got robbed and somehow or other ended up here. That sounds unlikely, but there are all kinds of stories like that. The bottom line is he did end up here, and he this is the only picture I have ever seen of Harry Barber. And again, if anybody has any others, I'd love to see them. But that is Harry with one of his castles. And when he arrived here, he apparently didn't have much money. And anyway, he went to work on the Jackson farm, Colonel Jackson's farm, which is now the Lane farm. And it was probably several years later that he actually started building the castles. And there's an awful lot of fun things that are told on that. Maybe we'll turn to the pages.
Do we know if that castle is still intact?
Yes, it is. This one, I'm not even positive where it is, but I have seen recent pictures of it, so I know it's still intact. Yeah. A number of people here in the area told me that they remembered stories how Harry Barber could do the work of 3 farmhands. So I guess he was a very hard worker. But he never talked about being a stonemason. But he did start, when he was bringing the cows in, he started collecting stones. And Gladys Lane told me sometimes he would come in with his pants hanging halfway down because he had so many stones in his pocket. But they had to be the right stones. And if you look at the castles, they are, absolutely uniform stones, or they're uniform in shape and size. He sometimes used different colors. Can you put that one there? This is one that he built on the Lane farm. And it is absolutely exquisite. If you drive by there, you can still see it. It's still in good shape. And if you notice, most of his castles have moats. Some of them have dungeons. They have tiny little steps. They're simply absolutely amazing creations. But he would collect the stones all summer long. Sometimes he would go walking in over in Milton and Winooski, I think, gravel pits, to pick up stones. He also would pick up stones along the shore. And as we go through these castles, you'll see some of them have different kinds of stones. Can we change this? And he also built other things. This is a flower thing that he built also on the Lane farm, and it's also still there. He worked at the Lane farm for a number of years, but he also was the caretaker over at Providence Island for 13 years. And oddly enough, he never built a castle there. But what he did build there, which has now fallen into disrepair, unfortunately, was a perfectly gorgeous rose garden, walled rose garden with a gargoyle fountain. And I think it was probably his best creation. It was very large. It was at least half the size of this room. And beautifully planted too, because he was apparently both a gardener and a stonemason, in addition to being a farmhand. Give me the next one. Okay. Put that one up. This castle you may recognize. It's right across the street. And you'll see that, some of them have those little pebbles. This one has more rectangular rocks. But he chose the stones very carefully, and he often had several different projects going at once. Gladys Lane told me that he used to have, he would build them in this workshop that he had, which may have been in the barn that burned, I don't know. But she says that there were, even after he died, there were pieces that you couldn't actually tell what they were going to be, but they were pieces of assembled masonry. And he assembled them in sections like that. So, he had a vision of what he was going to do. And every castle is different, quite different, if you look at them. And as far as I know, none of these castles imitate any particular castle that he was familiar with. But he was very rarely, in fact, as far as I know, he never took commissions for castles except one. This one is Corby's. When Corby got his house, he said, Corbin. And when he got his house, he said he had to have his castle. And so he commissioned Harry to build a castle on this beautiful promontory that looks right over the lake. And through all the flooding and storms and ice and everything, it has survived beautifully. Like many of the others, this was electrified. Had over 100 lights in it. Oh yes, They were all electrified. I don't think any of them is still working. I can't imagine it would be after all these years. But it'd be easy to replace that today with LEDs, obviously. And several of them had running water, so that the moat would be in the circulator. He believed in detail. Some of them had glassine windows. Most of those things have since been lost, but the castles themselves and the masonry has lasted. And
What year are we talking?
he started, I can't tell you when any individual castle was built, but he started about, I don't even know when Corby's was, but I think it would have been, maybe 1950 or so. But he started building castles around 1930, and I think he continued right up till the end of his life. But I had this lovely quote from Corby. He says, "Didn't you always want a castle when you were a kid?" Well, when I got my home, I got my castle. And he says, the magic of castles is seldom lost on anyone. There was a little girl visiting his house who did not want to eat her Brussels sprouts. I told her they were grown by the elves who lived up in the castle, and if she didn't eat them, the elves would be back at night to see about that. The child, he recalled, ate those vegetables until they were coming out of her ears. This castle is the only one that I know for sure has been moved. It's now owned by Robert Hemingway. Robert Hemingway bought it from the owner of the inn when the inn was sold. And it's a good thing he did. What'd you say? It's the bank. It's the community bank now. But, you know, I'm pretty sure it would have been destroyed at some point along the line. But he wanted that castle, and he bought it, and he moved it. And to this day, he has these beautiful flowers in it every summer, and it's a real showpiece. And it's something like this. People love them so much that I think they're going to last, because obviously Harry Barber did a good job, and now people treasure them so much that they take really good care of them. Yes.
My father bought the South Hero Inn, and Robert Hemingway helped us to clean up all around the yard. That was his payment, because my father didn't have the money to pay him, and he wanted that castle, and that's how he got the castle.
Oh, what a lovely story! What a lovely story! Well, I know that Bob thought that he got the best end of that deal.
He did, yes. I've been jealous ever since.
What?
I
Yes.
have a little bit to add. I just found out from Nelson Alex. that People that live there now, Bob Hemingway's daughter.
Yes.
Yeah.
And they told me that is lit up as lighthouse.
I don't think I've seen that, but that's wonderful. Well, that's what Harry always intended. So, this one has survived wonderfully.
It's on the corner of Station Road and Lakeview.
Yeah, this is on Station
Lakeview Drive
And
in South
Lake,
Dakota.
and Lakeview.
It's just right at that corner there, yes.
Just west of it.
Yeah. The thing that is amazing with these castles, I think, is the detail that you get with them. Because, just look at these.
Louder.
Can we zoom in on these, Ingrid? I think there's a way to.
No, it's down
it's
there.
here.
I haven't used
There you go. I don't know how clear it's going to be. Not very. But if you look at them, most of them have tiny little steps. The interiors are, their interior walls and doors. It's just an astonishing masterpiece. And I have always wondered why no one has ever tried to do it. I've seen a few crude, large pieces of stone put together, but I've never seen anybody try to do this. And I would, they're so cherished here in South Hero, you'd think it'd be quite an industry for someone, but maybe it takes more patience than most people have. But if anybody else knows anything more about these castles, I would love to know it, because as I say, I am not an expert in them. I reported on them. and I have enjoyed seeing them. And I wish very much that he built one on Providence Island, because then I would have gotten it. Yes.
Could you please tell us where each of these are?
We actually have the map here. Somebody very kindly left for us. I understand there is also one over in Milton at his home, at what was his home. But I was never able to confirm that. His widow wouldn't confirm it. I think, as I say, they're very private people, and I don't think they want somebody coming around looking at it. So, but this right here is Corbin's. There's Hemingway's. This is Sheraton's. It's down on West Shore Road, north of the winery. That's Lane's. And this is the one at the school, right across the road here. There are a couple more, but they're not publicly visible, and I don't think people actually want you to go peeking around looking for them. There's also supposed to be a house on Lane's property, and if somebody can ask them, there was supposedly he built a stone house as a memorial to a young man who died, but I don't know that for sure. And if you look on the internet today, you'll see all kinds of stories about Harry, most of which don't seem to have they aren't things I heard 25 years ago when I was closer to it than people are today, so I suspect these are legends that have been made up. But does anybody have anything to add?
Yes.
Yes.
Well, something unique about the Corbins was 3 years ago, my wife, Terry Robinson, was teaching here. It's been one of the best field trips ever, because the first group that went years ago were looking at it. Brett let everybody go down, and one kid just went unbelievably out of his mind. Mrs. Robinson, look, you can see the fairies. And the other kids all flocked, where? I see them. Well, the whole thing got credibility when she said it.
That's wonderful.
And every year they look to find the fairies.
Well, a lot of people have grown up believing that there are gnomes, fairies, elves, something inhabiting these, and why wouldn't they? I mean, these are wonderful habitations. Yes?
There's another stone castle just north of Eagle Camp. I'm not
Yes.
sure what,
That one's it.
but it's got nothing to do with Harry Barker.
Soleros.
Yeah, it doesn't even look like his. And it's funny,
And do we know the history of that?
no, I don't know. I don't know anything about that one. Does anybody here know anything about it? I've seen it, but it's not, I don't want to say it's crude, but it's not, the small stones and very carefully laid the way this one was. These are. Because these are truly astonishing. I mean, if you look here, he has these little archways, and you can imagine something going through it. I imagine the chipmunks and squirrels must love it. Yes?
When he built them, was it on public land other than the one that was commissioned and the one on the Wayne farm? Were the rest of them, he just picked a field and built a castle?
No, they were all put on private property, every one of them. He never made a business out of it. It was a hobby, and he did it to please himself. I think he missed seeing castles and wanted to bring some here. So he did. And probably we have better castles than they do in many parts of Europe, yes.
Did he live in Milton then and commute?
No, most of the time he lived in South Hero.
Okay.
As I said, he was a caretaker over at Providence Island, and he lived on the Lane farm. Those are the two places I know he lived for extended periods of time. He moved to Milton probably in the early 60s. Yes.
He built a Quonset hut, just probably a half a mile north of the winery. And I think it's been built over now, looks more like a house, but it's the first Quonset house ever around here. And they lived there because I went to school with his children. I didn't really know him very well, but I went to school with Ronnie and Gloria, his two older children. and that's where they live. The school bus picked them up there, right on West Shore Road. I don't know how many years they were there, but while I'm up, I'll answer the gentleman over there. I called, when I was on the board of the historical, I called Harry Barber and spoke with him 3 different years, trying to get him up here to do a program, and every time he said, oh, and his sister was gonna help him. He said every time I would call him and remind him, we're gonna do this for this month. He said, oh, I don't have it ready, I haven't got my materials ready, blah, 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 blah. Next year, the same thing. And then last year, he promised to do one in July of this summer, and you can see Eloise is here. Once again, I called him and it's the same thing, so
Well,
he would promise, but he wouldn't fulfill his promise.
Didn't he also say that he was at least going to come to this one and give us some comments?
Right.
I was looking forward to that. I'm very disappointed he
would
isn't
have
here.
pictures and artifacts and everything. That was his father, but he didn't come, so anyway.
Do you think anyone would be willing to give a tour, of the,
You would have to ask each of the individual owners, because they are all on private property. Some of them are quite visible, but they're still, if you actually want to see them close up, you're going to have to walk on private property. So somebody would have to arrange with each of the owners to do so.
because I know sometimes there's house tours, so this would be like a castle.
That'd actually be a very good idea, and probably be a nice fundraiser for the Historical Society.
We have a question back there.
Yes.
I assume that he had some kind of mortar that he used. Do we know any details about what he used to help keep these stones together?
No, we don't, except it must have been pretty good because they're still together. And as I said, his father was a stonemason, and he apparently learned the trade from his father. The other thing is that he also, when people found out what he could do with stone, he was commissioned to do several fireplaces and chimneys in the area. I don't know any of the ones that he did, but that was said a number of times that he did do some chimneys, some fireplaces, possibly, he did some garden things like the one thing at Lane's, but yes.
The story I've always heard is that he built these to pay for room and board post-depression. Is there any truth to that?
I don't think so, because he was well employed as a farmhand. And he, even when he was, caretaker over at Providence Island, he came over here, apparently, at the Lane Farm, in his workshop there, and built them in the wintertime when he didn't have nearly as much to do. He was, he certainly was here during the Depression, but he seems to have always had work to do because he was so highly regarded as a farmhand and gardener. In fact, the gardens over at Providence Island, when I first saw it in the 60s, were absolutely exquisite. Again, they haven't actually been kept up all that well, but they were beautiful. I still have some of the plants from those gardens that I filched with.
It's a lot more romantic to think it was a labor of love.
Apparently it was. Now again, check with his kids if they'll talk to you. But I think it was a labor of love. I mean, people don't do this sort of thing for, to make money. He would have used larger stones and coarser things and wouldn't have done nearly the job that he did do on these. They were astonishing in their detail. Yes.
Just to answer that lady's question over there about the tour, you can look, there's a synopsis of this out on the web. If you look up the Castles of South Hero and you read the thing, and it says right in it that most of them are visible from the road and none of them are to be walked on the private land to go see. So none of the people want you on their land.
There's a tremendous temptation to get up close and personal
Yes.
to them because the detail is so amazing. So if anybody knows anything else about it, or if somebody can get one of his kids to talk, I'd love to hear it. Yes.
I went to school with his daughter, and I believe that they were living where the Sheridan House is now, where that castle is.
Yeah.
So did he?
The last place they lived in town.
So he must have built that while he was living there.
Where's that?
It's on the West Shore Road.
On
just
West Shore,
past
north
the
of the
winery.
winery.
Just past the
Someone that has a house.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did you have a question? Thought I saw a hand raised over there. But, you know, I can't really add much more. I wish I could. And if anybody gets any more information, please let me know, because I would love to fill in some of the gaps. I don't know when each castle was built. I don't know, in most cases, I don't even know who it was built for. The Corbin Castle is the one that, you know for sure who and why that was built. The one at the inn that Bob Hemingway bought, or acquired, earned, that one, I understood he did get room and board that winter for building that castle on the inn property. So he got compensation for that, and he got compensation for the Corbin Castle. And from as much as I can tell, he never received any compensation for any others except for thank you and maybe, gifts of vegetables or something of that sort. But I don't believe that he ever earned any significant money on them. There's a story out on the web now about how he wanted to have it in a museum. It sounds like they're talking about the Shelburne Museum, and he was turned down. I doubt that's true, because I think Mrs. Webb would have loved to have had one of these castles. Yes?
Did he build in other styles of houses? Because my grandparents in Grand Isle had a castle. It was a stone house, and looking at this, it doesn't look like the same style. But the story is that they drove by his house, and I think it's the Sheridan House from what I'm hearing, or from what I can place. And they drove by it many times and asked him over and over if he would sell it, and he eventually gave in to them, and he sold to them. That's the family story, and it was my grandmother's place. And we have a lot of pictures of it.
There's a picture here of the house.
Of the house, but it's not a castle, it's more like a
But
manor
still
house.
Well, he did build at least one or two houses, but I don't have pictures of them, nor do I know where they are.
I have a book, which has me in it.
Can we put it here and show everybody?
Sure, we can, do you want to?
Then we can vote on whether it's one of his houses.
Well, if it's still hanging together after all that time, it's probably one of his.
There's 3 or 4 different ones, and pick the best one.
Because I've seen people try and do stuff like this kind of casually, and they fall apart in a few years.
Well, this one would have been moved from South Hero to Grand Isle. When my grandparents passed away and Dwight Willis bought the place, it was then moved to another place, and it's at another place now, so I'm trying to get it back. Even if it isn't his, I want it back. Can you, I don't know if you can
I would say that's his work, just looking at the
That's
fineness of it.
That's Earl Chamberlain that's
And
saying
that's
it.
Earl Chamberlain on top, Malcolm Allen. And they thought
I would
that
say
they,
that almost certainly is his work. I've never seen anybody else use small stones like that.
That's 53.
so my father thought that they bought it in the late 40s in South Hero from him. They wore him down, which makes sense.
Well, they must have been very persistent, because a lot of people tried to wear him down to get him to do
I
things.
can't think that it would have been built on the property. I mean, I think it must have been moved there. And apparently now it needs some repair, which is one of the reasons I'm trying to get it back.
You know where it is?
Yeah, I do.
Well, I mean, if you look at that, you look at the work, the fine stonework,
Yeah, I
it has the same look.
And I don't know where this family lore would have come unless it was true, because they always lived here. It was Willis Chamberlain's place up in Grand Isle.
I think you're absolutely right. I just don't see any chance that's anything except his work, because I haven't seen anybody else do it. As I said, I wish somebody would. I think it'd be a great, way to make money. Instead of getting maybe a couple $100 in room and board, you could get thousands for something like
We have a
this.
lot of pictures of us, especially Easter Sunday. We would all be dressed up and have a picture taken by the castle.
And
At Grandma's house.
it's pretty big too, Judge.
It is. Well, you can see, I mean, there's another picture that I didn't bring, was my grandfather is sitting on it, holding Earl again. So Earl was lucky.
Well, I think you all, you know,
I think we do.
I'm not an expert, but looking at that, I would say you absolutely have a Harry Barber house. And as I said, I did hear that there were 1 or 2 houses that he built, but I had no idea where any of them were. Now I know where one is,
Yeah, and we'll find it. We will get it back.
and he, yes, take that back so nothing happens to it. That's very, very precious, very precious.
Where is that castle in Grand Isle?
Right now, it's in somebody's back shed. Which is
Well,
why I'm going to get it back.
do your very best to get it, because it is a Harry Barber, and it does need to be loved. He built a dozen castles, I am told, more or less, and only 7 or so survived. And some of them were simply discarded. In the 50s, 60s, 70s, they were simply, you know, a piece of stone fell off and they were thrown out. I can't imagine that happening, but apparently it did. But his, those that remain are in very good shape. And as I said, with the masonry lasting that long in this climate, he knew what he was doing. So,
Eloise,
yes,
I have another little tidbit.
yes.
When Colonel Jackson actually were there for the summer on the farm, I used to go down there and play. We had 2 granddaughters that were my age and my sister's age. And we used to go down there and play with them on that huge, beautiful, big sand beach. And they were telling me that they were there while Harry was building that castle that's down on the Lane farm. And they said he was so nice to them. They were just little girls at the time, and they would bring their dolls out, and he would let them play with the castle, with their dolls, and the water was running at that time, and the lights and everything, and they just had a great time playing with their dolls, playing house with those castles. So he was a very nice guy apparently, and so anyways, that's what she told me about that.
That's so nice to hear, because you'd like to think that somebody who could build fantasies like this was
Right.
also a nice person,
Right.
and realized how important would be
Yeah.
to children.
Yep, and they had a lot of fun with them.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Thank you, Eloise. It's been great to hear your insight.
okay.
Oh, we have another.
If I may,
Yes,
if you could shut that mic off, please,
Yes, sir.
and the camera.
I don't turn the camera off.
Shut the camera off.
What's that?
This is Harry Barber's daughter, Melissa.
Well,